I met her the night the snow began to fall. Thick, heavy flakes that turned the world into a silence so deep you could almost hear your own heartbeat. I was closing up the small diner on the edge of town when the door creaked open and she stepped in, wrapped in a worn coat and carrying a duffel bag that looked like it held her whole life. She stood there for a moment, letting the warmth hit her face, eyes darting to the corners like she expected someone to follow her in. "Coffee?" I asked. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Black. There was something about her. Not the usual kind of beauty, but the kind that came from having lived through too much. Her fingers trembled when she lifted the mug, and her eyes, deep and restless, seemed to flicker between fear and exhaustion. "You got a place to stay?" I asked, more out of habit than curiosity. It wasn't unusual to see strangers drift through town in winter, hoping to vanish for a while. She hesitated. "I was told there's a cabin near Lake Dorsey. The old Miller place." I froze. That was my family's cabin, abandoned for years after my father died and my mother sold the land to clear her debts. But no one had lived there in ages. The roof leaked, the wood was splintered, and the lake froze so deep in winter you could walk across it and hear it crack beneath your feet. Still, something made me nod. "Yeah, I can get you the keys. It's not much, but it's dry." She looked up at me then, relief and suspicion warring in her gaze. "I'll pay cash," she said quickly, pulling a folded stack of bills from her pocket. "No names. Just a week." I should have refused. Every instinct told me to stay out of it. But there was a desperation in her voice, the kind that comes from running out of options, and I'd been there once too. So I took the money and gave her the keys. That night, I drove out to the cabin to make sure the generator still worked. The road was buried under snow, the trees like dark skeletons pressing in from all sides. When I arrived, she was already there, standing by the frozen lake, her breath fogging the air. "I didn't expect you to come," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I figured you'd need heat," I replied, trying to sound casual. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and pine. She lit a fire while I checked the pipes. As the flames caught, I noticed the way she kept glancing at the window, as if expecting headlights to appear in the distance. After a while, she spoke. "Do you believe places can remember things?" I looked up from the old generator. "Like haunted." She gave a small, humorless smile. "Something like that. Sometimes I think people leave pieces of themselves behind. Regret, fear, maybe even the things they're running from." There was a tremor in her voice that told me she wasn't talking about the cabin. Later, when I was about to leave, I saw her kneeling by the fireplace, feeding scraps of paper into the flames, receipts, photographs, a letter or two. The light flickered across her face, illuminating a kind of grief that words couldn't touch. "What are you burning?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Memories," she said simply. "Ones I can't afford to keep." Outside, the snow was still falling. As I drove away, the cabin's windows glowed like faint beacons in the white darkness. I didn't know it then, but that woman, whoever she really was, would pull me into a story far more dangerous and life-changing than either of us could imagine. And by the time it was over, that cabin wouldn't just be a hiding place. It would become the line between who we were and who we were forced to become. By the third day, the storm had swallowed the mountain. The wind screamed through the trees, rattling the windows like angry fists, and the snow piled high against the door, sealing us in. Inside, the cabin felt smaller, the air thick with unspoken truths. Claire hadn't said much since that first night, but I could feel the tension coiling tighter every hour, like the calm before something breaks. That morning, while I was splitting logs outside, I found her crouched by the back window, peering through the frost. She turned sharply when she heard me, eyes wide, her breath quick. "A car," she whispered. "Down by the road." I looked, but the snow was falling too thick to see anything. "Probably just hunters," I said, though even I didn't believe it. "No one came up here in a storm like this." Inside, she started pacing. Finally, she stopped and said, "You should know the truth. I didn't come here by accident." I leaned against the wall, watching her carefully. "I figured as much." She hesitated, then pulled a small, leather-bound book from her bag, edges singed, corners torn. "This is why they're looking for me." I took it from her. It wasn't money or jewelry, it was a ledger. Pages filled with neat columns of names, numbers, and coded entries. "What is this?" "Proof," she said, her voice trembling. "Of everything they've done. The money laundering, the bribes, the payoffs. I found it working for a man named Rourke. He thinks I destroyed it, but I couldn't. It's my insurance." I turned a few pages, feeling my stomach drop. These weren't small-time crooks. These were powerful names. Local officials, business owners, people who controlled this whole region from behind polished desks and fake smiles. "You stole from them," I said quietly. "I exposed them," she corrected, though her eyes betrayed her fear. "But they'll never see it that way." That night, we barely slept. The storm howled, shaking the cabin like it wanted in. Around midnight, the sound changed, a low rumble of tires crunching through snow. Then, headlights flickered across the walls. "They found me," she breathed. We grabbed what little we could, flashlights, a knife, the ledger, and slipped down to the cellar. It smelled of damp earth and old wood, the air freezing against our skin. Above us, footsteps creaked across the floorboards. Male voices. 2, maybe 3. "Check the back," one of them barked. I felt her grip my arm, shaking. "If they get that book, everything's lost," she whispered. "Promise me, if I don't make it." "Don't," I cut in. "You're making it." The door above creaked open, and boots thudded down the stairs. I raised the flashlight and swung it hard, catching the first man across the face. He fell backward, cursing. The second lunged forward, but Claire grabbed the ledger and bolted through the narrow gap at the far end of the cellar, a crawlspace leading into the woods. I followed her out into the freezing dark, snow biting at our faces. We ran until the voices faded behind us. Finally, we collapsed beneath the old oak at the edge of the frozen lake. The storm had calmed now, leaving the world eerily quiet. She looked at the ledger in her hands, then at me. "It has to disappear," she said. "If I keep it, they'll never stop." So we dug into the frozen ground with our bare hands, buried the book beneath the roots, and covered it with snow. She pressed her palm to the earth, as if sealing a promise. When dawn came, the men were gone. So was the cabin's warmth. Broken windows, blood on the floor, ashes in the fireplace. But Claire was alive. She left that morning with nothing but the clothes on her back, and I stayed behind to rebuild what little was left. Years later, when the lake thawed and the wind softened, I saw her again. Not as the frightened stranger I'd met that winter, but as someone reborn, strong, unafraid. She smiled at me and said, "Some debts can't be paid with money. Only courage." And as we stood beneath that same oak, I realized the truth. That cabin hadn't just hidden us. It had remade us. Two broken souls who'd risked everything and somehow found redemption in the ashes of our past.